So hello everyone, welcome to the Embodied Strategy session. And my name is Eirini Nedelkopoulou and I'm a lecturer in digital arts at the University of Glasgow. So I suppose most of the art forms that have been discussed today that are mixed reality, they take place in a mixed reality environment or virtual environment, or generally digitally informed environments, they benefit from vocabularies and conceptions of embodiment, often originating from phenomenological approaches that indeed pose questions and challenges about our perceptions or our material experiences as we know them. So today's presentation speaker is Joris Weijdom, who is a researcher and designer of mixed reality experiences, focusing on interdisciplinary creative processes and performativity. He's a lecturer and researcher at HKU University of the Arts, Utrecht, where he founded the Media and Performance Laboratory. And as part of his PhD project, Joris researches creative processes in collaborative mixed reality environments in collaboration with the University of Twente and Utrecht University. So this interactive presentation consists of two parts. In the first part, Joris is going to talk about his practice and the development of the site-specific 360 Blue Hour mixed reality installation, which was presented at the Prague Quadrennial in 2019. And in the second part, which is the most interactive, Joris will walk us through Blue Hour in an attempt to offer the first-person view of the project. And during this demonstration, you will be invited to ask questions while you're experiencing the mixed reality environment. So that's it from me, and over to you, Joris.
Yeah, thank you, Eirini. Maybe we can already put up a screen. So I'm sharing a desktop screen here. So I'd love to talk a little bit about the project that we showcased in Prague, as Eirini was already mentioning. However, I find it very important to take this particular presentation to talk mostly about the design and the design questions that arose from this mixed reality performance piece. Actually, I'm already introduced, which is really nice. So we can skip this slide, and that gives us more time for the rest of the presentation. So indeed, I'm doing my PhD. It's about creative processes. So I'm very interested in design and creative processes in collaborative mixed reality environments. And I'm also particularly interested in how invention and innovation based at the school of theater, but I also have a background in 3D animation. So I'm always in between different disciplines and different fields of expertise. And this will be a four-year PhD trajectory. Now, mixed reality is already an older term. Recently, people tend to talk about XR, but I find still mixed reality a very helpful term. And just to make sure that I actually refer here to the Virtuality Continuum by Paul Milgram. However, this model was, of course, mostly oriented on technical approaches to screen-based experiences and mixes. You could also see it as an experiential scale, anywhere between the real and the virtual. And I like that idea because we tend to be focused too much sometimes about particular devices affording particular types of augmented or virtual reality as if they are separate things. But actually, they're just an experiential mix between the real and the virtual. And you could also move back and forth on that scale. And we will see also that there's more and more equipment coming that you basically can slide between full immersion or full reality, whatever that means. Anyway, so just to make that clear, I show you now a time-lapse video of the actual space that we used for the Prague Quadrennial 36Q Blue Hour VR installation. Don't blink your eyes because it's very fast movie. So these are some quick visual impressions of the space. And basically, it was an ice skating hall in Prague, right next to the main venue of the Prague Quadrennial, which, by the way, for the people who don't know, is a once in every 4 year international gathering of all sorts of digital scenographers, scenography people, and architecture who basically do design of all sorts of theatrical spaces, and they showcase their work. And the 36Q project was already initiated in 2018 as an interdisciplinary project trying to expand the boundaries of what people would consider to be scenography or the domain of scenography. So more like this expanded scenography approach. And there were several work groups that were supposed to fill this particular space with all sorts of different medial approaches. So we had a video projection mapping group, a lighting design group, a sound design group, tactile environment group, a system integration work group, and an experimental sound group. And this year they added the black sheep here, which is the augmented and virtual reality group, which was led by both me and my digital scenographer, Canadian colleague, Paul Segis. So this is an impression of the Prague venue. So you can see the building. It was, of course, in the summer, so you have this wonderful daylight, warm, summery day. But when you approach the building, you already start to hear sounds coming from this dark space. And when you walk down the stairs, just lower the volume a bit. When you walk down the stairs, you enter this intermedial space that was filled by sounds and sights, by projections, by tactile environments, by the different work groups. And they built this whole experience up in 8 days. So it was a very compact and comprised workshop kind of 8-day thing where a huge team of people created this overall experience. We took the idea of blue hour, which is this particular moment in the evening whereby the sky and the water is not separated by a horizon. So there's this in-between space, both in space and time. And we thought to make an experiential cycle based on the 24-hour circadian cycle. So this installation, you could just walk into this space, and it had a 24-minute representation of a 24-hour circadian cycle of being during the day, then slowly going to the evening, falling asleep, waking up again, starting the day. So after 24 minutes, there was this both projection and audio and light design cycle. And people could just basically roam around. Now, 4 of the 36 pools that were designed by Romain Tardy, the artistic lead of this project, we basically claimed to do a VR installation. However, if you have ever worked with 3D graphics, you're probably aware that you don't do that in 8 days. So we had to already prepare ourselves with all sorts of materials to bring to the actual venue. We visited the physical space already in January in a preview week. And we decided to really get inspired by the building itself. So we took the physical space and asked for the blueprints of it, so the architectural blueprints, and made basically a digital replica in a computer in 3D. So we already wanted to overlap the physical space with the virtual space and start from that in the experience. So it was very much inspired by the actual site, and thus a site-specific piece. And then the VR part, when people put the helmet on, they see the same physical pool. They have to take their shoes off. They can step into the pool and then they feel sand. And then they can pick up a physical object, which is a lantern. And in the virtual environment, they see the same lantern. So there's this embodied connection between an object that you hold in a physical sense, the fact that you're stepping into a physical pool. You also see the ledge of the pool. You can really feel with your feet that it's still there. And this first part of the experience, people just are getting used to the fact that they can actually walk around. They're not attached in any way by a wire. It was a wireless full VR experience, so they could really crawl around, walk around, sit on the ledge, do whatever they wanted. At some point, we start to lift that pool up into the air. And this is a tricky thing because people might get nauseous or get a fear of height. So it was one of the design challenges to really think about how fast this pool had to rise up. And then when people come to what we call the light bridge, which was also in the physical space there, all the particles you have generated would start to rise up to the roof. And basically open up the building. And this opening up of the building was actually for us a way to deconstruct the space that you're physically in and allow, like Giel Kattenbelt was saying this morning, a more like mental space to open up, and we would literally ascend you into that mental space. So then you basically go through the roof when the whole building deconstructs, and you're moving upward while the roof is completely opening up, almost like a rib cage. So there you go. And when you arrive all the way in the sky, you see already that you're surrounded by 360 film. So you're going from a real-time 3D environment into a more like 360 video environment. And there we introduce 4 what we call portals. They're video bubbles that you can stick your head into. And these were 4 poems, video poems made by my colleague Paul Segis, shot all over the world. And they were loosely connected to the 4 seasons, talking a bit about the Anthropocene, the relation between man and nature. And but they were very poetic films. And they were really meant to sort of, have people reflect a bit on what it meant to be human in all sorts of landscapes in different seasons. So when you stick in your head in one of those portals and you hold it longer than a few seconds, you activate that world. And from then on, you're actually in that video world. As you can see now, for example, somebody has chosen the summer film, which was about Venice. Which actually, I think that same summer had, again, a lot of floods, so was quite relevant. And then you just basically go through a whole video while you still see the real-time 3D pool around you. You also still are holding the lantern. And then when you're almost at the end of the film itself was about, I think, 3 to 4 minutes. There's a bubble appearing out of the horizon, and it comes to your head, and there's a Zamboni, which we shot in January, wiping you basically back out of the dream, back into the space, the virtual space that is. However, that virtual space is then abandoned and clearly in another time. And that's then also basically the end of the experience, the virtual experience that is. So in the end, you will see it gets dark, and when you look around, at some point the titles appear, which is a clear sign that the experience is over. Now, I think what is already mentioned today, I was very happy with all the other sessions because I think it's very on point to mention that, of course, VR in its essence is not about escaping the physical reality. It's very much a very embodied experience. So it's much more like a dual experience of both the physical space and your body responding to all sorts of sensory input that you get from the virtual device, while also partly being elsewhere. So it's this physical body that is still central to the experience. And it is for this reason that I want to elaborate a bit more on the design of the VR experience and this mixed reality installation. Because how do you design a mixed reality installation if you know that the physical experience is central? Just a quick reminder of all the components. So we had a physical installation that we had to design. we had a physical object that was interactive, so people don't ended up with all sorts of weird devices with buttons. Then we try to combine real-time 3D with video, 360 video, which are two radically different types of VR. And we did that in a virtual space. That was an exact copy of the physical space. So an architectural reconstruction, so to speak, that really was one-on-one overlaying the physical environment. And then on top of that, you could browse or choose one of the four video worlds, which were visual poems in the experience. Now, the phenomenological side and also the explanation of the artistic arc and the dramaturgy considering it, we have written about, and soon we will publish an article in the Theater and Performance Design Journal on this piece. So for that reason, I'd like to encourage you to look it up when it's published. It must be ready in a few weeks or so. In there, we describe actually the design process, the staging, and the experience of the VR experience. But considering the design process, I'd like to take some aspects of that article and now show it to you in NEOS, which is very much about embodied improvisation techniques, puppeteering, how the body is central to the design itself, some ideas about this intermediality and also interdisciplinarity work that we've done. And on top of that, it basically means you have to think about dialogue. So how do we talk about this? How do we work together in this way? What kind of language and concepts are then necessary? So without further ado, I'd love to actually jump now into NEOS, and I have to make a bit of a shift. Maybe, Eirini, you can already explain, if you can come back for a minute, you can explain to everybody how people can already in the chat, if they have questions, do so.
Oh, yeah. In the same way that the previous panels and sessions worked, so you can see on your kind of YouTube page, I think on the right left hand side, the chat box, so you can leave your questions there, and I will actually read them out while we're navigating through the interactive installation.
Okay, and I have to also switch some of the audio devices. So let's see if I can change my audio settings here. I'm trying to do too many things at the same time. Audio. And let's jump to this one. Okay. So Eirini, can you still hear me?
Yes.
That's excellent. And do you also see now my hands and two worlds appearing?
Yes, I can see the introduction of the installation.
You see the introduction of the installation. I'm not sure that I understand what you mean.
I think it's like the content list of what you're choosing. Okay, and you're in. I think you're at the entrance now of the virtual entrance of the building, so I could see that.
Perfect. Okay, so I want to actually introduce to you my student, Diede Tap.
Hi.
And Diede is going to help me to present a bit the actual or virtual representation of the actual experience. But let me also start briefly a camera, because if you have to look through my eyes all the time, I heard already before that people sometimes get a little bit seasick because I'm looking around like crazy, of course. So I will now display, hopefully, a camera view, and let me check. Yes. So hi, everybody. This is my avatar. I cannot help it. It's not very accurate, but at least for now, it will probably work. And we're here together at the entrance, basically, of the 36Q virtual model that we have created for the actual experience. So here you see the entrance. And at the entrance, I will now move a bit.
at the entrance, I already introduced here the movie that I just showcased to you. So we don't have to see that one right now. And there's also some 360 photos. So you can see when I move myself into the photo, I can look around at the actual photo of the building being in exactly the same space. So here you see how many people actually work together in this particular project. But let's go in, Diede. I'm trying to skip for a moment to the third person. So we're now entering the space. And if I let you look now through my eyes again, we just saw the video there. But this building is like, interestingly enough, on the ground floor. You enter already on the first floor. So when I move forward here, there's a balustrade. And you can see I have been trying to sort of both show the making of and also the actual experience. But it's a bit of an inception because I'm using the virtual model for the physical experience at the same time. So that's a bit of a paradox. But let me just show you how the build-up looked like. So here you see we were really trying to get all the 36 physical pools in there and then create those two scaffolding structures. And Diede is enjoying the view as well. Very good. Let's go downstairs. And Eirini, if people have questions in the chat already, or they get too nauseous because of this camera view, they can respond, and you can tell me. All right, so we're now actually in the space itself. And what is important about this whole space is that we used it for the actual experience already in VR. But I now also use it as an exhibition space. So I hope you understand I try to use the virtual space for different purposes right now. Let me just stop the... So you hear the soundscape already? So the first thing I want to do is sort of take you to some of the design questions that we had. So the very first questions that came up to mind. And Eirini, maybe you can tell me if you can read this.
Yes, I can read about the kind of onboarding process.
Yes. So we had several design challenges, in fact. One is the question, how do you enter a mixed reality space, especially for people who have never done VR before? Then how do you have people acclimatize? So how do you give them time to get used and understand what is needed and necessary without giving them a lot of instructions? Then, of course, we wanted to transport them from a physical space into some sort of dream bubble video world space. So how do you do this without them getting sick, physically sick, because of all the movements? And then we wanted to create an experience that was not constantly about you have to do something, but it would also progress by itself, while we wanted you to maintain a certain degree of agency. So we would give you options to do things like looking into the portals, but you didn't have to. So we were trying to find a balance between needing to act or just being, just having the experience and be a spectator. So you could call it active spectatorship, to be in a space without needing to act, but you can if you want, just so you're acknowledged that you're there. And then, of course, you need to know how the experience is ended. And a big question is also about how to offer space and time to sort of reflect on what you just have experienced.
Sorry, Joris, there's a question about whether this has been used as a kind of provision for the exhibition.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
Exactly? I mean, is that what the... I suspect that they mean whether that was used before the exhibition happened, or...
And what do you mean this space that we're now in?
Yes, yeah.
I used this space, only the building is part of what we originally built for the VR experience. So basically, let me just get a view here of the physical installation. I'll just stand here for a moment. So the environment that you see here, I made after the actual experience. So I've actually built this exhibition for you just a few weeks ago. But I have used a lot of the original assets. So all the things you now see in VR is not what you were seeing when you were doing the virtual experience. So the movie that I showed you in the PowerPoint just now, that was the actual VR experience. But I'm now using this particular space to also have an exhibition about how everything was made. I hope that explains a little bit what I'm trying to do. But I understand it's a little bit of an inception issue here. So the physical installation consisted of having 3 chairs here. And people could just basically walk in and say, okay, I want to participate. And then we had 3 chairs, and then people could sort of wait for their turn. Now, this means that if somebody would already be in VR, so for example, just being inside here, doing the whole VR experience, somebody else is already watching you. So this is this idea of anticipation, whereby actually I'm having the VR experience, but there's also, I'm becoming a performer for the next one waiting. And this created this nice sort of experience where you have time to get used to the idea before you go in. But also when you have the experience, you had to go back to the chair to take your shoes on again. And then you had time to reflect while somebody else would go in. So we designed this space not only to be VR, but definitely as a mixed reality experience, whereby the experience basically starts, of course, when you enter the building. But our particular mixed reality piece starts when you basically decide to sit on a chair and wait your turn. So, Dida, if you can come here for a moment, because the starting point for the experience was actually outside of the pool. You have to jump, just use it. Yeah, there you go. So what we would have is a person that was doing what we call the onboarding. So a volunteer would explain how everything works, and they would offer this VR helmet. As you can see here, it's a HTC 5 Pro. And they would ask a person to take off their shoes and basically stand outside of the pool. So if you can stand there, Dida, and look in the direction of the lantern there. So we would already have the person pay attention to the physical object lying inside of the pool. And then we would put on the helmet. So if you can just hold the helmet for now, just to simulate the idea. And we would give the person the assignment to basically step inside of the pool. And the good thing about this was that the moment they fight, we give them sort of the moment to figure out when they physically feel confident enough to make that step, that leap into the physical installation. And of course, the pool itself is filled with sand, so it's also a bit unstable surface. And then we ask them to pick up the lantern. So if you can pick up the lantern, Dida, of course, you're now looking through a fake HMD, but that's okay.
Joris,
and yeah.
If you don't mind, I think there is a good point to read out one of the questions, which I think is relevant.
Yes. Yes.
So Joanna Backnell asks whether the participants could leave any lasting marks or impacts on the palimpsest of the virtual side.
That you mean after the experience?
I suspect during. But I don't know if Joanna wants to clarify that while they were experiencing that, during their experience, if they were leaving any marks in the virtual space.
No, basically not. Other than, so if they would be in the virtual experience, you would basically run through the progression of steps that I showed already in the video. But I think the mark that people would basically leave was not necessarily in the virtual space, but rather in the physical environment. Because when they returned to their chairs, they would start talking to each other. So there was a lot of interaction and considerations and all sorts of dreams. And people really started to tell all sorts of stories about their past, or they used to live nearby a beach. So the idea of leaving something behind, in our case, was really happening in the social physical space rather than leaving something behind in the virtual space. But for sure, there are many poetic VR installations that do such things. But it's an interesting question, and definitely something to think about for the next iteration if we make one. I think because of time, we have to basically move on a little bit. I'm going to bring us to the next part. Let me just briefly skip. There you go. Because I think what is important is that the installation was physically not there when we had to design it. So what I want to emphasize a little bit is this idea of prototyping while not having the physical environment ready yet. So I made a little setup here, which I call the physical prototyping setup, which we already weeks before we went to Prague used to prototype the idea of the mixed reality installation. So in the background, you see a video playing. That's my colleague, Paul Segis, and he's leaning on this brick there, this ledge, simulating basically the idea of the pool. And very important, he is taking the experiencer perspective. So he's really listening to his own body while we're prototyping all sorts of interesting ideas and interactions. And what is happening is that I can basically maybe go to the prototyping view. So I can walk inside of the image. So while Paul was sitting down there, he could basically listen to his own body. And Dieter, could you maybe pause the sound because the soundscape is a bit loud. It's in the middle of the room. There's a pause button there. So while he was there, thanks. He could basically experience the VR while listening to his body. And meanwhile, and this is important, we had our technical guy, Richard, who is actually sitting here behind the desk. So this is Richard. And Richard was having, and I'll just jump quickly here to a first-person perspective. He was having some controllers there. So while he was watching Paul and listening to his phenomenological or embodied feedback to the experience, he could live puppeteer all sorts of events in VR. For example, how the pool would go up or how portals would come or go. So we could really test out motion sickness, but also the dramaturgy of the experience by live puppeteering and have one of us in the role of the experiencer. Which, by the way, is coined by Robin Nelson as a different term, because a spectator would also emphasize the seeing, or audience would emphasize the hearing. But in VR, your whole body is engaged. So this is why they refer to, or we refer to, the idea of an experiencer. And then finally, I think that sorry, I'm also operating a camera at the same time. So let me just jump back to general camera view here. Okay, there you go. A virtual experience, and this is the physical space. So, and finally, the last role was a third member of the team, was the technical dramaturg. So everything that we hadn't made yet, he would basically just say, like, this will happen now, imagine this, see this happening. So he would be the mediator between the puppeteer and the experiencer. And we would all basically swap roles. So it's not that one of us had this particular role. We also would swap those roles while making. I hope this is clear that we did have already the physical, or we didn't have the physical environment, but we did have the virtual building to play with, and we made some controls. Now, to illustrate this, because this to many is very abracadabra if you haven't made any controls yourself ever, I made a little test setup here. And Eirini, how are we in time? How much time do we have left?
I think we have less than 25 minutes.
Excellent. So I'll try to round this off in 10 minutes. So what I've done here is that I sort of made a copy of the controls that we made before. And what would basically happen is that the puppeteer would stand outside of the experience space and have these controls to sort of control some of the variables. So I'm asking now Dide to step in the pool indeed. And if you want, you can also pick up the lantern, Dide. That's a bit up to you. And what I can now do is do some stuff that was happening in the real experience. So, for example, I can now lift Dide up. And Dide, does this go too fast, or are you getting sick when I do this? Dide is so confused about the whole thing that he's not even answering my voice. So what is nice about this is that we could basically...
The microphone's working again.
Okay, that's okay. I'm moving you up there.
Pretty fast.
Yeah, that's okay. That went a bit fast indeed. I agree. I will fly up to you, Dide, so I can be in your neighbor vicinity there. So we could basically have somebody respond physically and say, oh, this is too fast, this is too slow. And now, for example, the second part of the experience is that, of course, the roof opens up. So here the roof goes open. And then, of course, we have the deconstruction of the whole building. So all these events within the experience, we can put under a slider. And then, of course, I can also close the building again if I want to. And we can sort of do improvisations and talk about the speed in which things would happen, what would be a nice dramatic reveal, how much time you need to orient yourself. Let me quickly jump in with you so I can...
Sorry, can I ask something, Joris?
Of course, yes.
Actually, just a clarification from a previous question that I didn't quite understood.
Okay.
So the question was whether this kind of this virtual environment that you're sharing with us has been constructed before you enter the physical space as a model.
Yes, so I made the model of the building on the basis of architectural blueprints while we haven't even visited the physical space before. And then I had the model, and then we did a pre-visit in January. And then I realized that the real environment was a bit different than I thought. So I adjusted the model, but still we had no idea how the intermediate environment would be, because all the lights, the sounds, the video projections that were made by other people were made in 8 days before we opened. Yeah. So I hope that clarifies it maybe a little bit better.
It does for me. I don't know if it is for the person who asked the question.
All right.
There is also something related to the lighting, the physical lighting.
Yes.
And whether somebody is asking whether it took a lot of work to accurately recreate the lighting in the physical space.
Well, to recreate the lighting in the physical space, that's a confusing question, because do they mean the virtual space we're now in?
No,
because
actually, because you had created a virtual model before you entered the physical space for the festival. So when you had to actually put together the lighting for the actual show and recreate the lighting that you had kind of envisioned, did it take a lot of work? I think that's the question.
Well, yes. And the thing is, I was not part of the lighting crew. So basically, what people would do with the lighting, we only noticed in those 8 days that we were there. However, interestingly enough, the light designer, Pavla, who was responsible for the light design, she used my 3D model to do some pre-visualizations with her own lighting software. Mm-hmm. So funny enough, she followed a same kind of procedure whereby she did some pre-visualizations on the basis of the model that I had prepared. So it was very helpful to her design process as well. I try to illustrate just one more aspect of this embodied design, because that's what we sort of hope to illustrate a bit. Let me see if I can just jump to a different camera view. Again, virtual simulation. Sky portals, there we are. So you're not getting as nauseous, hopefully. All right, so what I can do now is I can play a bit with the appearance of the portals. And if I do that, I just make them appear like this. And what you can see is that Dida has to now make that decision whether he can look into portals or not. And I'll just go back to smooth POV for a moment. So those portals had several variables. We could basically have them go in size. So we had, for example, the portals getting smaller or larger. So now he can easily look around. But we wanted him, or the spectator or the experiencer, to move around in the physical pool more. So to do this, we decided to lower the height of the pool and do a bit like this. So when you're standing up, you cannot basically see what's in the pool. So automatically you will start already moving yourself closer to the pool and thus also physically move around through the sand. One other finding we had, for example, is that I can also play a bit with the idea of the pools coming closer or going back. And when we did, I thought it would be logical that it would come closer. Did if you want to look in one of the pools. Yeah, so if I would come closer with the pool, it actually is a bit scary because your body wants to move away from the pool when it's sort of closing in. So we had all sorts of assumptions on how fast the pool would come to you. And if I would have asked the programmer to do this, he would probably already make all those algorithms on the basing on the movement of the experiencer. But then you realize that actually, when you listen to your body, you get a completely different interaction design. So we based the final algorithms actually on those embodied improvisations. Now, again, due to time, thanks, Dida, for illustrating this. I know it's a bit last minute, but I think we at least show some of the aspects here. Let's go downstairs again and just round this up a little bit. And then we can have hopefully 5 more minutes or so for other questions.
Joris, can I ask actually just read out one of the questions
Sure.
asked by the audience. So Joanna is asking whether the virtual space captured any details of the ways that it is engaged with by individual participants for future analysis.
So whether I gathered any data on the type of interactions that people were doing, is that the question? Do I understand correctly?
So whether does the virtual space capture any details of the ways that is engaged with by individual participants for future analysis?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by capture details. We were in fact using where we're not basically recording the behavior of people. So we were not having in any way a data collection of behavior in the space. What we have done, though, is a lot of interviews. So in the end, and this is maybe nice to move to some of the conclusions, in the end, we interviewed the people who had the experience, and be aware that it ran for like 10 days or so. So we had one experiencer every 15 minutes, and the whole experience has been running for about 10 days for 9 hours a day. So basically, we calculated we had about 500 people going through this experience, and we have done some interviews. I think about 10 to 12 interviews with people while we were sitting in those chairs, just having a chat. And we asked them about their sensations and the questions they had and the things that were interesting to them. So that was actually more like a qualitative approach to data gathering that we've been trying to do.
Yeah.
Now, just a final conclusion about, embodied design. I think it's important to summarize that the sand that were in the pools were not there by chance. The sand was very important because when you're doing VR, you're basically having this physical sensations, and your whole nervous system really responds as if it's really real, while cognitively your ratio, of course, knows it's not real at all, and that leads to a lot of confusion in a way, and also people feel unstable. Now, the sand worked really well because actually it was an unstable surface, but because people were standing on it with bare feet, they constantly, with their physical and physiological system, both the proprioception and the kinesthesia, had to be activated to constantly stay in balance because they were standing on sand. And because part of their system was still constantly recalibrating the physical body, people didn't get dizzy. So we asked at least 30 people to say, did you get nauseous? Did you feel any discomfort? And to our surprise, out of those 500 people, only 3 people reported to the volunteers that they didn't feel so good and they had to abort. That is, for this kind of mixed reality installation, and the fact that we almost virtually lift you up through a space, which is the right recipe for nausea, was kind of a miracle. And then, of course, like I already said, sitting there, having people both anticipate the experience by looking at other people perform, or afterwards sitting down and sort of have time to think about what happened to them, was very important to the whole piece and the installation. Which is why when you design these installations, it's not only what you see inside of VR, but of course also the whole environment in which this experience is happening should be part of the design. There's so many more things I want to tell about this project, but I guess, and I can imagine we're running close to the end.
I think we have about let me actually think 7-8 minutes, and I was just wondering if we could talk a bit about the dramaturgy of the piece.
Yes,
and I would like to start by actually reading out Adam's question. So he says,
what I will do, Eirini, is then I will get out of Neos and then turn back to the video so I can also see you, and then we'll have our final conversation. Hey, Dide, thank you so much. If you can wave to everybody, thank you for helping us. Well done, and I see you soon. All right, good. Let me jump back to a low-cost world. There you go. All right.
So, welcome back. And Adam is asking, how do you think dramatists, who probably won't be able to rehearse in this environment, devise narratives that do justice to your extraordinary technical creation?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question because
I think you can see the question. It is on the screen.
Devices narratives that you do just to extraordinary technical creation. Well, this is the thing. I don't know, Adam, what you mean by dramatist, but we were both designers, we were performers, but we also considered ourselves the dramaturgs. So what I meant with the 3 roles, one is more like the dramaturg, one is the experiencer, one is the puppeteer. We switch those roles continuously because when somebody is embedded in design, like my friend Paul is, he looks with different eyes to the design. I'm much more about interaction design. So, and then Richard was the technical guy. So having them also be in the role of a dramaturg means you're emphasizing different aspects of the same experience and a different design. So I think that is it's very important. And this is more the interdisciplinary point I still wanted to make, if I can, Eirini, is that it could be considered, and we want to propose this also in the article, it could be considered that mixed reality experience design is maybe a new hypermedium. So looking through the eyes of film or looking through the eyes of games might not be doing justice completely to the potential of the platform. So it's a very interdisciplinary, potentially intermedial or hypermedial experiential platform. And for that reason, it might also mean you need to also have people that are capable to have an interdisciplinary dialogue and also swap roles to make sure that you're continuously looking from different perspectives and keep questioning what it is that you're making. And I mean, what we made by no means, I still call it like a poetic attempt or a sketch. It is not like a full-blown, full dramatic piece. It's not text-based, as you clearly notice. It's much more experiential. But I think it was a good exercise, at least, whereby we combined 360 video and real-time 3D. We had people really being anxious of doing VR because they got sick before in other experiences, who actually were very positive about the fact that they didn't get sick. And we learned a lot of stuff about how to build these things. And I just want to offer this idea of embodied improvisation techniques and building controls just to the community, because I feel we need to develop a dramaturgy, a new dramaturgy, both in language as in the way we work. And the only way to do that is involve our bodies as well. There's some tacit knowledge and experiential knowledge that unfolds itself when you're engaging the body in the design itself. I had many assumptions on how I thought the VR would work that didn't work at all the moment I put the helmet on and Paul or Richard started to puppeteer all sorts of variables. So I think...
Sorry.
Yes.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that mixed reality, you're suggesting that mixed reality is some sort of kind of new hypermedium. And that's also more interesting to think what Giel Kattenbelt said previously, and also he has extensively written about that theater is a hypermedium. So are you suggesting that mixed reality is a different kind of version of theater, or that mixed reality is replacing theater?
Well, I never talk about replacing. We're also like still to read books. We still go to movie. I mean, all media, all disciplines still can exist. But I think definitely the way Giel is saying that theater can sort of hold or encompass all sorts of other media, VR and mixed reality especially does the same. It's visual, it's auditive, it's physical. And it's very performative. So in many ways, it really encapsulates a whole spectrum of different media. And I think it's performative. I'm not necessarily saying it's theater or replacing theater, but it's very performative. And I think it's right.
Maybe VR is theater, is a theatrical platform, isn't it?
Well, I always like to talk about theatrical or performative rather than saying it's theater or it's performance. So I mean, it's more about the process of experiencing and the lens through which you look at the experience, of course, that determines how you want to frame or conceptualize it. But being rooted partly in 3D, but also working at a school of theater, I understand the importance of liveness. And I think it's the 360 videos in VR are nice. It positions you differently. It asks all sorts of questions about how you engage with the video layers. But it's not really real time. It's pre-recorded stuff. And I thought it was the potential of real-time 3D or combinations, hybrid forms, are making it immediately live again. So all these questions where people were saying, could you leave something behind? What was it that you could do? What was then the influence that I had? Are things that become, of course, immediately relevant because it is live. And like with immersive theater or those kind of more participatory types of performances, you need to start thinking about agency and engagement. And I think in our case, we decided to leave behind a bit the idea of really influencing the story. It was rather that we were offering degrees of active spectatorship by picking up the lantern, looking around, moving around. But kept it to that for now. But for sure, I'm going to do a new project in NEOS, actually, that is going to be an immersive theater piece, and then we're going full on questions about how people
I think probably you have answered the last question, but I just read it out in case there is something else in terms of the interactivity of the piece. So the question says, was the narrative push triggered by the player, or was it more a timed linear approach up to
that's indeed exactly relevant for what we're now discussing. Somebody else mentioned this already this afternoon as well. You also need to have a certain amount of people being able to experience the piece. We devised the original piece that you could stay as long in it as you want. And you maybe see only one video poem, or you wanted to return and then see another one. Maybe you just wanted to linger in a certain space. All of that to us was actually more consistent with this idea of a site-specific environmental poetic piece. However, you also have visitors, you have numbers, like the opening night was like 150 or 200 people coming in. You cannot then just say, sorry, the 4 installations, they're all taken, so why don't you come back in 3 days? So we made the calculation that we wanted to have an arc of about 12 minutes per person. So we had 4 people per hour, and this is how we ended up facilitating this experience for 500 people. But it does mean that you then have to have a hybrid strategy. So people could still pick up the lantern. They could still decide which portal to look into or not. But meanwhile, there was also a timeline going. And if you would hit a certain cue, the last portal you looked in, for example, briefly, would then suddenly stick to your head and come to your head. So we try to find a very fine balance between sensing that you have agency and at the same time not needing to do stuff, and at the same time progressing according to a very strict timeline of 12 minutes.
Joris, can I ask you a question? You said that in your article that is about the development of this project, you talk about technodramaturgy, and also you mentioned earlier on in your presentation about the centrality of the body, and I was just wondering how the centrality of the body is negotiated in technodramaturgy.
Oh, what an excellent question, Eirini. I mean, the technodramaturgy is a term that is very young. It has been mentioned before, and I'm sorry, the quote was actually indeed in my slides, and I'm now so doing too many things, I cannot remember the name. But it's also in an older version of the Theatre Performance Journal article, where somebody coming from puppeteering is coining this idea of technodramaturgy. But I'm already talking about a technical dramaturg and the role for technical dramaturg for about 10 to 15 years. Because when I had the lab, I was always the person needing to translate the artistic dramaturgy into a technological one and vice versa. Now, the whole idea is that technology is, of course, not just an instrument. It has its own will, it has its own stories, it has its own limitations. So there's a hidden dramaturgy embedded in the type of media and technology that you use. So technodramaturgy, in a way, opens up this idea that you can, especially when you do the embodied design and improvisation that we were doing, you can also have the technology influence the process of design. And not force the technology to do what you want to do, but it be more in dialogue. However, you do really need to understand the technology for that. So it's not having technologists fixing problems and then you decide what is artistically interesting. You need to also be really aware, like you need to, as a dancer, you need to know your body. As a technodramaturg or working with technology, you need to understand also how the body of the technology that you're working with works, or what potential it has.
That's great. Actually, we have 2 more questions, and I think they're both about Neos VR.
Yes.
So Joe is asking what led you to choose the Neos VR as a development platform.
Okay, I'm going to. Thanks, Joe, because I understand my presentation is very confusing. I have used Unity 3D for the actual VR piece. So the piece that I presented a year ago was made in Unity 3D and running standalone on local PCs over there. This has to do with like 8K full 360 video and then times 5 kind of performance issues. However, due to Corona, I was a lot in all sorts of social VR environments because we couldn't physically meet anymore. So I was exploring, like people know Second Life, and there are all sorts of spin-offs of VR-based social VR spaces where people come together. And I found Neos VR. And Neos VR it stands on its own because you can build while you're in VR. I think Giel was already mentioning this morning, saying that people should have more agency to actually build the story while they're in VR. Well, that's what you can do in Neos VR. You can even do visual programming in Neos VR, and it's social. So, like my student, he's living in another city, and he just could join me in Neos, and we could sort of rehearse together. I started to explore this also because I wanted to work with my students, but now it's really exploding into a full-blown project with immersive theater.
Jori, I'm afraid we have to wrap up.
Yes.
There are a couple of questions, but maybe...
I just want to mention about Neos that it's an open platform. You can download it on Steam. And if you are working in theater and performance or mixed reality design and you're interested in using Neos, please contact me, because I will start a research group actually exploring this platform more for its theatrical potential.
Okay. Great. I think we have to come to an end here.
Oh my God, it just went by
Joris.
like in 10 seconds.
I think that was amazing. A lot of very interesting information about the project, but also the dramaturgy and the making and the design of it. So that was brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm afraid there are a few more questions, but I think you can still respond to them via the YouTube chat.
I think there's a closing up at the day, and I will be there tomorrow also probably with the session. So if you want to talk to me, why don't you come tomorrow also to the sessions with the
That's a
open
great
space.
idea.
If we have time to talk, that would be really nice. And otherwise, find my email and just contact me.
Okay, great. So
Eirini, thank you so much.
And
yeah,
thank you
thanks.
for the
You were my lifeline. It's just so weird to scream at your laptop and not have any context. So you really helped me and pulled me
You're
through.
very welcome. Okay, thank you
so
everyone.
much.
Thank
All
you.
right, bye everybody.
Bye.
Talk
Bye.
soon.